This happened when I was a junior in high school, and I keep thinking about it now that I'm older. Maybe someone can tell me if it was as messed up as I think it was. Our history teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, got really sick. Hospitalized sick. The principal told us she'd be out for a few weeks. No big deal. Substitutes come and go all the time. Then Mr. Henderson showed up. He seemed normal at first. Quiet guy, maybe in his 40s. Same brown jacket every day. Old leather briefcase that looked like it belonged in the 80s. But he had this way of watching us. Not like a teacher. Like he was studying us. The weird stuff started in the second week. He stopped following Mrs. Rodriguez's lesson plan and gave us strange assignments instead. Photocopied sheets with crooked text, like from an old machine. Character development research, he called it. The first one was simple. Describe your daily routine. Wake up. Time. How you got to school. After-class habits. It felt like a lazy assignment, but easy enough. Then the questions got specific. Where do you live? What does your house look like? Do you have siblings? When do your parents get home? Do you walk home alone? What route do you take? One day, I raised my hand and asked, "Why do we need to write about my little sister's schedule?" He looked up, and I swear his eyes lit up. Then he smiled. Not a teacher smile. Something else. Character development research, he repeated. Understanding. Family dynamics helps us analyze historical figures better. It didn't make sense, but I was 16. What did I know? The assignments kept coming. He wanted floor plans of our homes. To understand historical living spaces. Then, descriptions of our bedrooms. Include photos, if possible. Personal. Space psychology project. My friend Jake leaned over one day and whispered, "Dude, this is getting weird." I agreed. It was weird. But here's what really got to me. Mr. Henderson started staying after school. Not grading or helping students. Just sitting in his car, watching. My mom was usually late picking me up, so I saw him a lot. Same spot. Every day. Silver Honda Civic near the back of the lot, jotting things in a notebook as kids walked by. Once, I saw him following the Patterson twins' bus, driving slowly, keeping his distance. I wanted to say something, but say what? That our sub was creepy? Adults don't listen to that kind of thing. By the third week, the questions got even worse. What were our parents' work schedules? Exact times? Did we have alarms at home? Were our neighbors gone during the day? Were we ever home alone? Every time I walked into class, my stomach twisted. But I kept doing the assignments. We all did. He was still our teacher, right? Then something happened I'll never forget. One night, I stayed late for drama club rehearsal. It ended around 5:30. The parking lot was almost empty, but Mr. Henderson's car was still there. I ducked behind a bus and watched. He was on the phone, papers spread on his dashboard. Our papers. Our assignments. I could hear a bit of what he was saying. Stuff like schedules, opportunities, and the girl with the sick grandmother. That was me. I'd written about my grandmother in one of those assignments. I felt sick. My hands shook as I ran to the other side of the school and called my mom from there. The next Monday, Mrs. Rodriguez was back. No warning, no explanation, no goodbye from Mr. Henderson. He was just gone. I went up to Mrs. Rodriguez after class and asked, "What happened to the substitute?" She blinked. "Substitute? Honey, we never had a substitute. I was only out for a week with food poisoning." My blood ran cold. "But we had assignments. Photocopied sheets. Can you show me?" I pulled out my folder from my locker. She flipped through the pages, and her face went pale. "Take these to the principal, now." The principal asked questions and made copies. A police officer visited school the next week and interviewed some of us. But here's what haunts me. When I talked to kids from other classes, they didn't remember Mr. Henderson. "We never had a sub," they said. "Mrs. Rodriguez was only out a few days." But my whole class remembered him. I still have those assignments in a box in my parents' attic. Sometimes I think about digging them up, looking at them again. It's something I struggle to shake. I catch myself glancing over my shoulder whenever I see an older man in a brown jacket. The fact that adults dismissed it still chills me. I never felt safe on that campus again. I never found out what he was planning to do with all that information about us, and honestly, I don't think I want to know. My name is Alex Rivera, and I lived in Cedar Valley. I'm not trying to sound crazy here, but I need to tell someone about what happened in my senior year chemistry class. Maybe you'll think I'm making this up, but I swear everything I'm about to tell you really happened. I was enrolled in advanced chemistry with Mr. Torres, a veteran teacher of over 20 years. Students said his class was an easy A if you followed the rules and didn't ask too many questions. It was perfect for me, since I needed the credit to graduate. My lab partner was Sarah Martinez. She was meticulous, always double-checking measurements and reading safety instructions. Her notebooks were pristine, and she never missed a detail. The first few weeks were uneventful. We mixed baking soda with vinegar, observed flame tests, and practiced titrations. The lab smelled of sulfur and ammonia, but it was all routine. Still remember the fluorescent lights flickering and how the polished countertops reflected our nervous faces. The clang of metal tongs against glassware echoed ominously, and the scent of acids lingered around each station. I felt a growing tension in my chest, like something invisible pressed against my lungs. It was as though the laboratory itself was alive, watching us work. Then one afternoon, Mr. Torres unlocked a supply closet and brought out unmarked bottles. I asked what they were, and he said they were advanced compounds for college prep. The labels had chemical names I'd never seen. Sarah requested the safety data sheets, but he insisted they were standard and promised to share the details later. We accepted his answer and continued. In October, right after my sister's birthday, I arrived with frosting under my nails. We were working with a clear liquid from one of those bottles. Sarah followed every protocol, goggles on, gloves snug. 10 minutes in, she paused and frowned. "I feel dizzy," she whispered. Her voice shook, and her pupils were unusually large. She stared at the whiteboard formulas and whispered, "Do you hear that? The equations are talking." I heard only the hum of the fume hood. He rushed over, took the beaker, and announced, "Just a mild allergic reaction. Nurse's office now." His tone was firm but worried. In the hallway, I overheard his hushed phone call. "Reaction stronger than expected. Document all details." His voice was clinical, as if discussing an experiment. Sarah missed 2 weeks of school. When she returned, she was changed. Quiet, compliant, never asking questions. When I looked at Sarah, it felt like I was staring at a stranger wearing her face. Her eyes were empty, her laughter gone. The bright spark she once had was replaced by a hollow compliance that chilled me more than any chemical ever could. I tried asking what she remembered. She said only that she felt sick, and that was all she could recall. That's when I began watching Mr. Torres more closely. He carried a small notebook during labs and scribbled constantly. One day, I glimpsed his notes. My name was followed by baseline response within expected range. Sarah's page included heightened sensitivity to compound 7 and memory suppression successful. The phrase, memory suppression, sent chills down my spine. I noticed other students changing too. Jake, once fidgety, became calm. Emma, who argued with teachers, became obedient. The locked supply closet had a small window. I climbed up and saw bottles labeled Compound X47 and Subject Compliance Enhancer. The labels looked professionally printed. I snapped a photo, but later it was too blurry to read. It was as though my hands shook when I needed them steady. I remember the bitterness of the metal taste from the beakers, the cold touch of the glass, and how my heartbeat echoed in my ears every time I heard the lid click shut. Those details are branded in my memory like scars. Mr. Torres's gaze during experiments felt predatory, like a scientist observing lab rats rather than a teacher guiding students. I wanted to tell someone, parents, principal, anyone, but feared being dismissed or triggering an investigation that would tip him off. Sarah and I graduated. She moved on to college but remained distant. At graduation, I asked about that lab day, and she stared blankly, clueless about what I meant. I held onto the blurry photo for months, hoping to decode it, but eventually I deleted it, telling myself I was overreacting. I wake up at night, heart pounding, convinced I still smell solvents and hear whispers of formulas. The memory of that class haunts me like a warning. Knowledge can be weaponized by those we trust. And I wonder, if I hadn't paid attention, would I have become just another entry in that notebook? I share this now hoping someone else will believe me. I need to tell someone about this because it's been eating at me for months now. I can't sleep right anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face and that calm expression when everything went down. I worked evenings on the high school cleanup crew for gas money. My mom's car breaks down all the time. The job seemed simple. Empty trash, wipe whiteboards, mop floors. Mr. Garrett was the head custodian, quiet and hunched, with thick glasses magnifying his eyes. He nodded when our shifts overlapped, but rarely spoke. I assumed he just kept to himself. But he was always in the computer lab. Every night I worked, he sat there for hours. The door was closed and lights dim. Once I asked what he was doing, he claimed deep cleaning keyboards. I figured keyboards get filthy, but I never saw him clean anything. I only saw him hunched over a laptop, clicking and typing. Sometimes, he had multiple USB drives plugged in. I assumed he updated software. I knew nothing about computers. My buddy Jake always left his charger in that lab. One night I returned after my shift to fetch it. The main doors were locked. I had emergency keys. The hallway lights were half off to save electricity. My sneakers squeaked on the polished floor. I hate that sound. It reminds me of hospitals. I passed the computer lab and heard rapid clicking. Mr. Garrett's car remained in the lot. The door was ajar. I peered inside. He sat at a student computer with 3 USB drives attached. The screen showed a girl's Facebook page. Not his, but Sarah's from chemistry class. He clicked through her photos. Then he opened a desktop folder and dragged images into it. His focus was intense, like this was critical. Filing cabinets loomed behind him. I never noticed them before. They looked oversized for maintenance supplies. I should have left immediately. Instead, I stayed frozen. He glanced at the door nervously. Then he switched to another account. Another student's profile appeared. He knew everyone's passwords. I could barely remember mine. He took screenshots, copied files, organized them in folders. My phone buzzed, with a text from my mom. The sudden noise snapped me out of my trance. I bumped the door, and it creaked. He looked up and smiled calmly. "Oh, hey there," he said, as if nothing was wrong. He invited me inside. My legs felt heavy, though I wanted to run. He turned the laptop toward me. It displayed private Instagram DMs, messages about family drama and personal secrets. "Kids think it's private, but I observe them," he said. He clicked to reveal a girl cutting herself. Photos she sent to her boyfriend laid bare. He opened a cabinet filled with printed screenshots and photos, hundreds of pages piled neatly in folders. "I've done this 7 years," he said proudly. Over 300 students cataloged. He flipped through records of text, posts, grades. "This one planned to run away," he explained. "This one's parents are divorcing secretly." The tone was clinical, not creepy but chilling. He analyzed behavioral patterns like a scientist. I finally whispered, "Why do you do this?" He looked surprised by the question. "Because it's fascinating to see their authentic selves," he replied. He continued revealing private details and psychological observations. My mind raced with fear and disbelief. I don't remember leaving, only that I needed to escape. I mumbled an excuse about going home. He nodded and returned to his work. I never reported him. Who would believe such a story? I was afraid he knew about me too. I quit the job the next week under the pretense of focusing on grades. But I still see him pushing his cart in hallways. He nods and smiles that same calm smile. I wonder how many more secrets he's collected, how many more files he has in those cabinets. The worst part is knowing he's still there, watching, collecting pieces of everyone's private lives, one screenshot at a time. I keep this secret to myself. I'm haunted by knowing what lurks behind locked doors. Sometimes I wake with terrible sweat, replaying his voice and those files piled high. If someone doesn't stop him, I fear his next future discoveries.
Clara had always been an ambitious student. From the moment she enrolled in university, she was determined to excel in her field of paranormal studies. It wasn't long before she discovered an old building on campus known for its eerie history, the research building. The building was a maze of dark, narrow hallways and rooms that had been abandoned for decades, except for one particular room, Room 3, which housed the university's most mysterious and dangerous experiments. The room was notorious among students. Rumors of strange occurrences, disappearances, accidents, and strange sounds had plagued the building for years. Some students whispered that the room was cursed, while others claimed it was haunted by a spirit that had once been an experimental subject. But Clara, driven by her curiosity and thirst for knowledge, was not one to believe in superstitions. She saw the room as a challenge, an opportunity to uncover what truly lay hidden. One evening, she stayed late to continue working on a research paper about the history of paranormal phenomena. The library had closed, and she found herself alone in the dimly lit building. As she walked through the long, echoing hallways, she noticed a strange chill in the air, as though the building itself were alive and watching her. It was almost as if the very walls whispered her name. Curiosity led her to Room 3. The door was old and made of weathered wood, but there was something inviting about it, as if it had been waiting for her all along. She hesitated for a moment, but then pushed it open. The room was smaller than she had expected and filled with old, dusty equipment. In the far corner of the room, there was a desk with a single lamp on it, casting an eerie glow across the room. As Clara walked in, the door behind her slammed shut, almost as though it had been pushed by an unseen hand. She immediately felt a cold rush of air sweep through the room, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. At first, she thought it was just the building settling, but then the temperature dropped drastically. It became so cold that she could see her breath, even though it was a warm night outside. Suddenly, Clara heard faint footsteps in the hallway. She turned quickly, but no one was there. The silence that followed was suffocating. She walked toward the door, but when she tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. It felt as though something was holding it shut from the other side. Panic started to creep in as she desperately tried to force the door open, but remained locked. The lights flickered, and she heard something, or rather someone, whisper her name from the corner of the room. Clara spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the shadows, growing longer and darker with every passing second. She stepped back toward the desk and noticed an old photograph lying face down. She turned it over, her heart racing. The photograph was black and white, depicting the very same room, but something was off. In the background, standing next to a shelf, was a shadowy figure, almost transparent like a ghost. The figure was staring directly at the camera, its eyes hollow and empty. Clara's blood ran cold. She quickly tried to leave the room again, but as soon as she touched the door, the lights went out completely, plunging her into darkness. The temperature dropped even further, and Clara felt as though she could hear breathing in the room, slow, heavy, and labored. It wasn't her own. The door opened, but not because she touched it. It opened on its own, slowly, like something was beckoning her to enter. Clara hesitated but stepped forward. The room seemed to stretch before her. She could hear a faint sound now, like a child crying, but when she looked around, there was nothing. The room seemed to grow darker with every step she took. Then, out of the corner of her eye, Clara saw it. The shadowy figure from the photograph was standing in the corner of the room. It was no longer a vague shape. It was solid, towering over her. Its eyes locked onto hers, hollow and soulless. "Leave now," the figure whispered, though its voice was more of a growl. Clara turned to flee, but the door slammed shut again with a deafening crash. The figure began to move toward her, its footsteps slow and deliberate. With each step, Clara felt her heart racing, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She was trapped. There was nowhere to run. Desperation overcame her. With all her strength, Clara pushed against the door. It budged just enough for her to slip through, and she ran into the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. As she fled down the long corridor, She heard the footsteps behind her, always just a step away. When she finally reached the exit, she didn't stop running until she was outside, breathing the fresh air of the night. But that was just the beginning. Clara thought she had escaped, but from that night on, she felt a presence following her, like eyes watching her every move. And every time she closed her eyes, the shadowy figure from the room appeared in her dreams, always saying the same thing: "You can never escape me." At Grimwood University, there was a legend that had been passed down for generations. The students spoke in hushed tones about an underground library hidden beneath the campus, a place that had been sealed off for years. No one knew how to access it, and no one dared to try. According to the stories, the library was not like any other. It was home to books that were cursed and some of the most dangerous knowledge in the world. It was said that long ago, the headmaster of the university, a man named Professor Redmond, had made a pact with dark forces in exchange for forbidden knowledge. He had delved too deep into occult practices, and his greed for power had led to his disappearance. Some said he died in the library. Others said he was trapped there, bound to its shelves for eternity. Javier, a curious and adventurous student, had always been intrigued by the stories. He didn't believe in such things. He considered them to be nothing more than myths meant to scare new students. But there was something about this particular legend that caught his attention. He became obsessed with it. Late at night, he would search the library for any hint of the hidden entrance, any clue that could lead him to the forbidden library below. One rainy evening, when the campus was quiet and empty, Javier finally found it. A hidden door in the basement of the university's oldest building. The door was covered in dust, almost as if it hadn't been opened in centuries. With trembling hands, he turned the old, rusted knob and stepped inside. The air inside was thick and oppressive, like stepping into another world entirely. The underground library was vast, its shelves filled with ancient, tattered books. The dim light from his flashlight cast eerie shadows across the room. The smell of mildew and decay filled his nostrils as he walked deeper into the labyrinth of books. As he explored further, Javier began to feel a sense of unease. It wasn't just the cold. It was as though something was watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. He felt eyes on his back, even though he was alone. He tried to ignore the creeping sensation and continued his search. But as he walked deeper into the library, the air grew colder and the shadows darker. Suddenly, he stumbled upon an old book lying on a pedestal in the center of the room. It was bound in what appeared to be leather, and its pages were yellowed with age. As he opened the book, he saw strange symbols etched into the paper. The words seemed to writhe before his eyes, as though they were alive, moving on the page. A cold gust of wind blew through the room, and Javier heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned quickly, but no one was there. His heart began to race. He heard the footsteps again, closer this time. He dropped the book and turned to leave, but the entrance had vanished. The shelves stretched on forever, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. The shadows in the library began to move. They twisted and grew, forming shapes that seemed to lurk just beyond the edge of his vision. Javier felt the weight of their gaze on him, and he knew he wasn't alone anymore. It was then that he saw him, the figure in the dark cloak, standing at the far end of the library. The figure's face was obscured by a hood, but Javier could feel its presence, cold and malevolent. The figure took a step toward him, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "You should never have come here," the figure whispered, its voice low and rasping. Javier tried to run, but the library seemed to stretch on endlessly, the walls closing in around him. The shadows followed him, reaching out like tendrils, pulling at his legs. He couldn't escape. The figure moved closer, and with each step it took, Javier felt his strength drain from him. The last thing he heard was the figure's voice in his ear, whispering one final warning: "You belong to the library now." Mariana had always been fascinated by the mind. As a psychology student, she spent countless hours studying the workings of the brain, particularly how dreams could influence reality. When she heard about an experimental study on lucid dreaming being conducted at her university, she knew she had to be a part of it. Dr. Sinclair, the professor in charge, was a charismatic but mysterious figure. He promised the participants that they would be able to experience total control over their dreams. The idea of being able to shape her dreams and explore the subconscious intrigued Mariana, so she eagerly signed up for the study. The experiment was conducted in a dark, sterile room filled with monitors and wires. Each participant was hooked up to a machine that would record their brain activity during sleep. The idea was simple. Through a series of carefully controlled techniques, the participants would enter a state of lucid dreaming where they could consciously control the events of their dreams. The first night was uneventful. Mariana found herself in a peaceful meadow with a soft breeze blowing through the tall grass. It felt serene and beautiful, a perfect dream. But when she tried to wake up, something went wrong. She couldn't move. She couldn't wake up. It was as though her body was frozen in place, and no matter how hard she tried to wake herself, she remained trapped in the dream. The dream shifted, becoming darker and more distorted. She was no longer in the meadow, but in a long, dark hallway. The walls seemed to close in on her, and she felt the weight of something terrible watching her from the shadows. She turned to run, but the hallway stretched on forever. As she moved through the endless corridor, Mariana encountered strange figures, faceless, contorted shapes that lurked in the darkness, always just out of sight. They whispered her name, their voices echoing in her mind. Each time she tried to wake up, the dream became more real, more suffocating. On the second night, Mariana tried again, but this time, the dream took a darker turn. She found herself trapped in a room, locked in a cage with no escape. The shadows outside the cage seemed to move and twist, forming shapes that were not quite human. They reached through the bars, trying to pull her closer. Their touch was ice cold, like death itself. Mariana's fear intensified, and she realized that something was horribly wrong with the experiment. The more she tried to escape, the more the dream seemed to feed on her fear, growing stronger and more terrifying. By the third night, Mariana was no longer sure if she was dreaming or awake. She was losing track of reality, unable to distinguish between the dream world and the waking world. She would wake up only to find that the world around her felt distorted, as though it had been shaped by the nightmare she had experienced. The more Mariana delved into the dream, the more she realized that the experiment had gone far beyond what anyone could control. The boundaries between dream and reality had become blurred, and she could feel the shadows closing in on her. There was no escape, and then, one night, she saw it, a dark, hooded figure standing at the foot of her bed. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and it reached out for her. She screamed, but no sound came out. As the figure touched her, the world around her shattered, and everything went dark.
I'm not really good at telling stories or anything, but what happened to me 6 months ago, I still think about it every single day. I was doing DoorDash back then, you know? Just trying to make some extra money. My car was making this weird noise whenever I turned left, but I couldn't afford to fix it yet. I had been delivering for about 6 months when I got this order. Chinese food from that place on 5th Street. The one with the faded sign that's been there forever. Nothing special about the order itself. Just some lo mein and egg rolls, but the address, man, the address led me to this apartment complex I'd never seen before. It was on the outskirts of town, past the old gas station that's been closed for years. You know the one. Still has those ancient pumps out front. The complex looked like it hadn't been maintained in decades. Half the unit numbers had fallen off, and the parking lot was covered in broken glass. I remember stepping over a rusted shopping cart someone had just left there. The customer left specific instructions in the app. Don't knock, leave food by door marked with red X. I thought it was weird, but people leave strange instructions all the time. Sometimes they're sleeping, or they have a baby, or whatever. I found the door easily enough. Someone had spray painted this crude red X right across the peeling paint. The paint was still kind of wet looking, like it had been done recently. As I bent down to set the bag of takeout by the door, I noticed this smell. Sweet and rotten. Like meat that's been left in the sun too long. I tried to breathe through my mouth, but the smell was so strong it made my eyes water. That's when I heard it through the thin walls. What sounded like muffled sobbing. Quiet, but definitely there. My first thought was maybe someone was watching a sad movie or something. But then I remembered my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She always cries when she watches those soap operas. This didn't sound like that. This sounded different. More desperate, I guess. I know the instructions said not to knock, but I was worried. What if someone was hurt? I knocked anyway, just a gentle tap. The crying stopped immediately. Like, completely. Dead silence. Then I heard footsteps approaching the door. Slow, deliberate steps. But the door never opened. Instead, this voice whispered, through the wood, "Thank you for feeding us." The way they said "us" made my skin crawl. It was drawn out like they were savoring the word. And the voice, it didn't sound right. Too deep, too gravelly. Like someone who'd been screaming for hours. I got out of there fast. Forgot about the delivery photo. Forgot about everything. Just ran back to my car with that weird left turn noise and drove home. I remember I had to stop at a red light, and my hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel. The next morning, I was eating cereal, that generic brand stuff because I was broke, when I saw it on the news. Police had discovered 3 missing persons in an apartment complex on the outskirts of town. The reporter said they were all malnourished and showing signs of prolonged captivity. The apartment had been vacant for 2 years, according to the landlord. I recognized the building immediately. Same broken glass in the parking lot. Same rusty shopping cart. I never found out who placed that order. The account was deleted from the app by the time I checked. Customer service said they had no record of it, like it never happened. But I know it did. I can still smell that sweet, rotten smell sometimes. Usually when I'm trying to fall asleep, and I never took another delivery order after dark. The strange part is what happened afterward. Little things started bothering me in ways they never had before. A shadow moving wrong across my bedroom wall. The sound of my refrigerator humming in a rhythm that seemed almost like whispered words. My neighbor's dog barking at exactly 3:17 a.m. every night for 2 weeks straight, then stopping completely. I began noticing delivery drivers differently, too. The way they'd linger at doorsteps just a second too long. How some would glance over their shoulders before walking away. Once, I saw a Pizza Hut driver standing motionless beside his car for nearly 5 minutes, just staring at an apartment door. When I blinked, he was gone. I quit DoorDash 2 weeks later. Got a job at the hardware store downtown instead. Say, pays worse, but at least I know everyone who walks through that door. At least I hope I do. Sometimes I wonder if those people are grateful I brought them that food. If somehow, in that moment of horror, I accidentally did something right. But mostly, I try not to think about it at all. Because when I do, I remember that voice saying "us," and I realize I never counted how many footsteps I heard approaching that door. This happened about 6 months ago. I still think about it sometimes when I'm driving late at night. Maybe I shouldn't have taken that delivery, but you know how it is when you need the money. I'd been doing food delivery for about 2 years. At that point, nothing too crazy, just trying to pay off some student loans. The job was pretty boring most of the time, until that Tuesday night in March. The order came in around 9:30 p.m. Family meal from Romano's, you know, that Italian place near the mall. 3 large pizzas, some breadsticks, sodas. Pretty normal stuff. The address was on Maple Street, which I knew pretty well. Nice neighborhood, big houses with those perfect lawns. I delivered to the Hendersons before, maybe 3 or 4 times, over the past year. But when I pulled up to their house, something felt different. The lawn was all overgrown, which was weird because Mrs. Henderson was always out there gardening. There were newspapers scattered on the driveway, some still in plastic bags, and all the windows were dark. Not just dark like everyone's asleep, but empty dark. You know what I mean? I sat in my car for a minute, engine running. Part of me wanted to just call the customer and tell them I couldn't find the house. But the porch light was on, so maybe they were just, I don't know, having a quiet night or something. I grabbed the food and walked up to the front door. The doorbell didn't work. I could hear it was broken when I pressed it, so I knocked instead. The door opened immediately, like before I even finished knocking. This woman stood there, and I'd never seen her before. She was maybe 40, but looked older. Her hair was all messy, like she'd been running her hands through it. She was wearing this old bathrobe, and her eyes, they kept darting around, never really looking at me. "Food delivery," I said, holding up the bags. She grabbed them from me without saying anything. Then she shoved this wad of cash into my hand. I looked down and it was way too much. Like $60 for a $30 order. This is too much," I started to say, but she was already closing the door. That's when I heard it. Kids crying. Not like normal crying when you're upset about something. This was desperate. Scared crying. Coming from somewhere inside the house. The woman must have seen my face change because she stopped closing the door. "They're just upset about dinner being late," she said quickly, but her voice was shaky. I stood there for a second, listening. The crying continued, and it sounded like more than one kid. Maybe 2 or 3. And they sounded, I can't explain it right. Like they were trying to cry quietly but couldn't help it. "Is everything okay? In there?" I asked. She snapped at me then. "Mind your own business and leave." And she slammed the door. I walked back to my car, but I couldn't shake this feeling. My mom always told me to trust my gut, and my gut was telling me something was really wrong. The crying, the woman I'd never seen before, the condition of the house, none of it made sense. I called the restaurant when I got back to my car, asked them about the Henderson family if they'd been ordering from us lately. The manager told me something that made my hands go cold. "Oh, the Hendersons? Their workplace called us 3 days ago, asking if we'd heard from them. They never showed up for work, and no one's seen them since." I hung up and called 911 immediately. Told them everything. The strange woman, the crying kids, the missing family. The dispatcher said they'd send someone right away. I waited in my car until the police arrived. 2 officers went up to the house and knocked. No answer. They knocked again, louder. Still nothing. One of them walked around to the back while the other tried the front door. It was unlocked. They went inside and came out about 10 minutes later. The house was empty. No sign of the woman I'd talked to. No sign of any kids. Just empty. But here's the part that still keeps me up at night. 2 days later, I saw it on the news. The Henderson family had been found dead in their basement. All 4 of them. The parents and their 2 young kids. The coroner said they'd been dead for over a week. Over a week. I delivered food to that house. I talked to someone. I heard children crying. The police never figured out who ordered the food that night. The phone number was disconnected. The credit card was reported stolen weeks earlier. I quit delivering food the next day. Got a job at a warehouse instead. Better hours, better pay. But sometimes when I'm driving past that neighborhood, I still slow down when I get to Maple Street. The house is empty now. Has been for months. There's a for sale sign in the yard, but it never seems to sell. I've never told anyone this story except my girlfriend, and she thinks I was just stressed out or something. Maybe she's right. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. But I still have that $60. I never spent it. And sometimes, late at night, I can still hear those kids crying. My name is Ronan Miller. I lived in Cedar Falls. I used to deliver food for a living, pizza, Chinese, whatever, for about 2 years before I had to stop. And I mean had to stop. Look, I'm not the smartest guy. I barely finished high school, and my girlfriend always said I don't notice things. But even I picked up on stuff that didn't feel right. It started with one house on Maple Street. Nice place, nothing fancy. I'd bring Thai food every Tuesday and Friday like clockwork. Pad, Thai and spring rolls. I never saw the customer. Never. They'd leave an envelope taped to the door with exact change and a note saying, "Leave food on mat, thanks." I thought it was weird, but whatever. Then I noticed a tiny camera tucked inside their porch light. Not a doorbell camera everyone has now. This was smaller, hidden, pointed right where I'd stand. I began looking around on deliveries and found more cameras. Way more. The house on Oak Street with the broken mailbox had one hidden in a fake owl on the fence. The apartment complex on 3rd Avenue concealed one behind the no soliciting sign. The blue house where an old lady supposedly lived but I never saw had a camera disguised as a sprinkler head. I counted 15 houses total across different neighborhoods, and I never met the customers face to face. The instructions grew weirder. Knock 3 times and wait 30 seconds before leaving food. Stand on the X marked on the porch. Call if you don't see it. They made me stay in place longer. My hands shook when making these deliveries. I felt watched from windows, probably was. Nights I lay awake, replaying every knock, every odd instruction, wondering who watched and why. I told my manager, he laughed. Security cameras are normal. Hidden ones? Paranoid, he said. If I didn't like it, quit. But I needed money, car payment, rent behind. My anxiety worsened, but I forced myself to work, convincing myself it was nothing. Serious and stress kept me up at night. The breaking point came one rainy Thursday night. I was at the Thai food house on Maple Street when I slipped on their wet porch. As I got up, I saw something small and black. A memory card, likely fallen from their camera. I should have left it, but curiosity won. At home, I plugged it into my laptop. The folder held hundreds of video files of delivery drivers, pizza, Chinese food, grocery, all of us. But worse were other videos mixed in. Footage of drivers at their homes, getting into cars and driveways I recognized, walking up to doors not in orders. One showed a driver I knew, Tommy, sitting in his living room watching TV. Someone had followed us, learned where we lived, recorded our personal lives. Panic surged. I felt violated, terrified of what they might do with that footage. I unplugged the laptop so fast I almost broke the USB port. I grabbed clothes and drove to my sister's, place 3 towns over. I didn't pack properly, forgot my phone charger and wore the same shirt for days. I barely spoke, haunted by images of cameras hidden everywhere. I never went back for my last paycheck. Changed my number and moved in with my sister permanently. I got a warehouse job where I don't go to random houses. Sometimes I think about how those hidden lenses might still be active, catching new drivers unaware. I imagine strangers watching, studying every move, planning something beyond my dread. I consider reporting it, but without evidence or the memory card, it feels impossible. I just hope whoever collected those videos never found what they were really looking for.
It all started just a week ago, but it's been playing on a loop in my mind ever since. My family isn't your average holiday crew. While most people spend their winter vacations relaxing somewhere warm or heading to ski resorts, my relatives prefer something different. Every year, we rent a huge, isolated cabin deep in the Vermont woods. This year's spot looked like a log fortress, sturdy, sprawling, and perfect for our unusual traditions. That's where things took a strange turn. One of our favorite, and admittedly dangerous, family rituals is a giant game of laser tag not in some backyard, but in the pitch-black forest. Every second to last night of the trip, the adults suit up in thick winter gear, grab heavy-duty laser guns handcrafted by my Uncle Wyatt, and disappear into the snow-covered wilderness for a no-holds-barred showdown. Yes, it's exactly as wild as it sounds. The game is simple. Last person not tagged wins the cash prize and bragging rights until next year. If multiple players survive until midnight, they split the winnings. Once you're hit, you return to the fire pit near the cabin and wait. When the second to last player returns, everyone fires their real guns into the sky to signal the game's end. Safe? Probably not. But tradition is tradition. This was my first year playing. I just turned 18, and I was pumped. Not for the money, but just to finally be part of the madness. Before we started, Uncle Wyatt gave us the rundown, how to use the equipment, where to aim, and the rules. Then, without warning, he sprinted into the woods like a lunatic. Everyone scattered. Most of them ran uphill, so I figured I'd head downhill, less traffic, better odds. The snow on the ground gave just enough visibility. I wandered deep into the forest and found a small ridge where I could catch my breath and scout the area. After resting, I started creeping sideways along the hill, trying to loop around and surprise someone. I must have walked for 15 minutes, putting serious distance between me and the cabin. Then I heard a soft crunch footsteps behind me. I ducked behind a tree. At first, I didn't see anyone, but then, straining my eyes, I spotted a faint trail of footprints leading to a thick tree, maybe 15 yards away. Someone was there, hiding, watching. But why hadn't they tagged me? I had been completely exposed. That's when I started to feel genuinely uneasy. I took off uphill, trying to put distance between me and whoever that was. But soon, I saw another set of footprints. These started deep in the woods, looped toward me, then vanished back into the trees. Someone had flanked me, and they'd gone even deeper than I had. Then I heard a thud like someone falling in the snow. I bolted back toward the cabin. My phone said it was past 11 p.m. Time had flown. I followed some fresh prints leading toward the house and picked up the pace. Just past a line of trees, I spotted my cousin Drew walking casually with his laser gun. I ducked, aimed, and got him. His marker lit up. He groaned, slammed his hand on a tree, and sulked off toward the cabin. I grinned, proud of my first kill. High on adrenaline, I came up with a plan. I'd sprint forward, then double back and hide in a spot where my footprints would mislead anyone following me. Classic bait and switch. I executed it perfectly, hiding behind a tree without leaving obvious tracks. I waited. Suddenly, my marker blinked. I'd been hit. But how? The laser beam was coming from the spot I'd just left. Someone had tracked me. I stood up, expecting the shooter to turn off their laser and reveal themselves. But they didn't. The beam stayed pointed directly at me. It felt wrong, like they were taunting me. I started walking toward the beam. All I could see was a pair of hands holding the laser gun. The body was hidden behind a tree. Just then, gunshots rang out in the distance. The signal that the game was over. But if I'd been tagged and Drew was the last person I hit who tagged me, that's when the shooter stepped into view. I didn't recognize them. A total stranger. And standing next to them, another stranger. Before I could react, I heard crunching behind me. I spun around and saw a man in a ski mask holding a knife in one hand and a trash bag in the other.
He locked eyes with me and charged.
I ran, screaming, dropped everything. I could hear all three of them chasing me, shouting words I couldn't even recognize as English. The snow slowed me down, but I didn't dare stop or look back. I was running for my life. Finally, I saw the lights of the cabin. I pushed harder, lungs burning, legs shaking, and that's when I saw Uncle Wyatt. He came running from the clearing with a rifle in hand. He raised it and fired 3 shots into the air. I heard someone behind me stumble and fall. Then silence. I collapsed at Wyatt's feet and passed out in the snow. The next morning, my aunt explained that she had dropped her laser gun during the game after a fall, which explained how the strangers got their hands on it. Drew had apparently tagged 6 people before I got him, so he really was the final kill. Uncle Wyatt and my dad searched the woods that night but found nothing. Too many tracks, too many paths. The next morning I was jolted awake by the sound of shouting. It was Wyatt yelling into the forest like a man possessed. I threw on my coat and rushed outside. That's when I saw a snowman, standing perfectly still at the edge of the woods, facing directly toward the cabin. Clutched in its stick hand was the missing laser gun. Without hesitation, Wyatt raised his rifle and put 3 bullets through the snowman's head. Then he turned around and walked back inside without a word. It's only been a few days since then. But if anything else happens, I'll let you know. Middle school left me with more awkward memories than I'd care to admit, but one in particular still haunts me. It wasn't just weird or uncomfortable. It was deeply unsettling, the kind of experience that clings to you years later, no matter how badly you want to forget. I didn't have many friends back then. Just 3: Nolan, Eli, and Corey. We were the kind of kids who never quite fit in, which made us stick together even tighter. But over time, the dynamic shifted. Eli and I started to pull away from Nolan and Corey, though none of us ever talked about it out loud. That summer, Nolan surprised us by inviting the group to spend a week at his family's summer house in Maine. None of us had even heard of the place, a secluded island somewhere in Casco Bay. Given how private his family always was, it didn't shock us. They were unusual, but that's a whole other story. The car ride was long and tense. I had a cold and kept sneezing, which irritated Nolan's dad, who was clearly a germ freak. Corey and I also argued the whole ride over something silly typical for us. We had to take a ferry to reach the island, and that part was at least a little exciting. The house was small but cozy. It felt like stepping into another reality. I don't know how else to put it. The island itself had a surreal vibe. Everyone seemed to know Nolan. Even strangers on the street greeted him by name. We spent most of our time biking, and for kids our age, that was perfect. On the second day, I noticed my favorite Barcelona snapback was missing. I was heartbroken. It was the only soccer merch I had. Nolan guessed I'd left it on the beach, but I was sure I'd brought it back. I even cried to his dad, who brushed me off and told me not to let something so trivial ruin the trip. So I forced myself to move on. The next day, I realized one of my collectible pens was missing. I was obsessed with pens back then and brought my collection everywhere. Eli said he remembered seeing me holding it on my bike, which made me feel worse. I didn't want to cry again, especially not in front of Nolan's dad, so I said I wasn't feeling well and went to bed early. I woke up around 3 a.m., unable to fall back asleep. While I was tossing and turning, I suddenly heard whispering. It was almost too quiet to hear, but it was definitely there. It sounded like it was coming from Corey's bunk, but I couldn't be sure. I was too scared to say anything, so I stayed quiet and eventually drifted back to sleep. I didn't mention it the next morning. Later that day, while we were playing outside, Corey said he had to use the bathroom. He was gone a while, which was typical, but when I glanced at the house, I saw him staring at us from a second-floor window. That wouldn't have been strange, except the house didn't have a bathroom upstairs. I looked again, and he was gone. I told Nolan's dad I felt sick again, and stayed behind when they went out for dinner. Lying in bed, I kept thinking about what I'd seen, the whispering, the missing things, Corey in the window. Something wasn't right. I got up and searched his duffel bag. What I found made my stomach drop, my Barcelona cap. Then my missing pen. Then a nail clipper my mom had packed, a toothbrush, and even a pair of my underwear. I was horrified. But the worst part was his notebook. I almost wish I hadn't opened it. The pages were filled with disturbing sketches, monsters, violent acts, horrific scenes. Some were so heavily drawn the pencil had ripped through the paper. There were even drawings of me. One showed me nailed to a cross with my legs missing. Toward the end of the notebook, my name appeared over and over. The last page said, "I'll do it tomorrow." Shaking, I showed the notebook to Nolan's dad. He was stunned. He told me to return everything the way I found it. I didn't want to, but I listened. Before putting the notebook back, I tore out one of the pages. Minutes later, he gathered everyone and said there was a family emergency. We had to leave immediately. As we packed, I could feel Corey's stare on my back. I was too afraid to turn around. We drove nonstop back home. Nolan's dad dropped Corey off first, then Nolan and Eli, and finally me. On the ride to my house, he told me not to say anything to my parents, that he'd already spoken to Corey's family, and it would be best to let it go. I nodded, but as soon as I got inside, I broke down and told my parents everything. They were furious. Within minutes, they were on the phone with the police. I showed the page I had taken. That was enough for the police to get a warrant. They found the notebook and most of my missing items, all except the pen. I never saw Corey again. His family moved away. He didn't return to school. I never hung out with Nolan either after that. But just last week, A letter showed up in my mailbox, no return address. Inside was the pen, along with a note that simply read, "I remember everything. Now I'm seriously considering moving." By the time senior year rolled around, I realized I'd spent every spring break stuck on campus. While everyone else jetted off to beaches and booze-fueled getaways, I stayed behind partly because of money, partly because I just didn't bother. But that final year hit different. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed out on something. So I decided it was time to do anything before college ended. I still couldn't afford international travel, but my girlfriend Erin started searching for low-cost options closer to home. She ended up finding this quiet little cabin tucked deep in the woods of Lake County, California. It had an old-school charm, a fireplace, a vintage record player, a hot tub, and absolutely no cell reception. Definitely not a wild beach party, but it felt like the perfect kind of escape. We invited her best friend Zoe and her boyfriend Nick to join us and make it a double-date getaway. None of us had ever done a vacation like this together, so we were excited. The drive was about 2.5 hours. Nick had a ridiculously small Mini Cooper, so the girls had to squeeze in the back. He was weirdly touchy about his car every time someone brought it up. He got defensive. Still, it was a convertible, so at least the ride felt breezy. We arrived just after 8 p.m. It was completely dark, and the cabin looked a little creepy with no lights on and trees pressing in from all sides. Still, the inside was cozy. That first night, we hung out by the fire, opened some wine, played board games, and just relaxed. The second night was more lively. We finally convinced Nick to join us in the hot tub, which was in its own screened-in room connected to the back of the cabin. We brought drinks, cranked up some music, and started a game of Never Have I Ever. Everyone was loose, laughing and buzzed. Then a flash of light, blinding and fast, lit up the entire spa room like a lightning strike. But there were no clouds, no thunder, just light. We froze. I turned off the music. No one said anything. I climbed out of the tub and stepped out onto the back deck. All I could see was blackness and forest. Then I heard it, a sharp clicking sound. It came from somewhere deep in the woods. Then another from the opposite direction. Then a third. Seconds later came the whistling, from multiple places at once. It felt like the trees were closing in. I yelled for everyone to get inside. We slammed the door shut and locked everything. Sitting in the living room, soaked and shivering, we tried to come up with explanations. A prank? Locals messing with us? Then came the banging. Someone was pounding on the front door hard. Zoe panicked. Erin was already crying. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find and told Nick to call the police. I shouted that I had a gun, a bluff, of course. The pounding stopped. Nick said the cops were on the way, but we were in the middle of nowhere. No clue how long it would take. Everything was silent for a few minutes, until the living room window shattered. A rock crashed through it with so much force it knocked over a lamp. Screams. Glass everywhere. I told everyone to run upstairs and lock themselves in. I stayed downstairs, knife in hand, waiting for someone to try to climb in. But no one came. Instead, I walked to the broken window and picked up the rock. Taped to it was a note, written in jagged black marker, L-E-A-V-A. Minutes later, the police finally arrived. They swept the property, searched the woods, questioned us, but found nothing. No footprints. No people. No explanation. We weren't going to stick around for round 2. We didn't even wait until morning. We packed up and got out of there that same night. The Airbnb host gave us a full refund without hesitation, but completely ignored all of our follow-up messages. Erin's convinced they knew something, maybe even expected something to happen. It would explain the unusually low price and how far off the grid the place was. As for me, I'm done with quiet, remote cabins. Next spring break, I'll take overpriced cocktails